Chapter 431. After seeing her, Erwin said something to the doctor and walked toward her. "Z, sure enough, you're here in the hospital." Maisie smiled bitterly. "Where else can I go if I'm not here?" She then looked at Erwin as soon as she responded. "What did you talk to the doctor about?" Erwin was taken aback for a split second and replied with a smile. "I was just asking him about Mr. Goldman's condition." "Is his condition complicated?" Maisie asked and saw that Erwin did not deny it immediately, so she lowered her eyes, and her voice sounded a little hoarse. "Is his condition grave?" "It's indeed a little complicated." Erwin's expression looked a little complex. If it were just a gunshot wound, it would be great news if Nolan was able to survive it. Unfortunately, Nolan's situation seemed to be more complicated than a gunshot wound. Maisie was about to say something when she suddenly received a call from her father all the way from Zlokova. She hesitated for a moment before picking up the call. "Dad? Z, are you okay over there? I heard on the news that a riot took place in Staslo." Stephen's worried voice came from the other end of the phone call. Maisie frowned. "I'm fine, Dad, don't worry about me." Stephen responded, "I called just to make sure that you're all right. How much longer do you need to stay there? The kids miss you all." Maisie thought of the fact that she still had 3 children. What would the children do if I were to really die back there? Besides, even Nolan hasn't woken up yet. She bit her lip and replied, "It might take a while. Please tell the kids that their daddy and I are all right." Stephen hung up the phone after a few words of advice, while Erwin placed his hand on her shoulder. "Return to the hotel first, just leave everything at the hospital to me." Maisie trusted Erwin and nodded. Erwin went to find the doctor after Maisie left. He knocked on the door, opened the door after getting the doctor's permission, and entered the room. Dr. Ryan stood up. "Mr. Lincoln, please take a seat." Erwin walked to the couch and sat down. "The matter that we talked about minutes ago. Can you please elaborate more?" Dr. Ryan knew about Erwin, so he calmly handed a blood test result to Erwin. "We tested the composition of Mr. Goldman's blood and found a very strange problem." Erwin grabbed the blood test result, took a glance at it. And it could clearly be seen from his expression that he was flustered. Dr. Ryan then added, "Mr. Goldman's situation is very similar to that of the virus-infected patients from 30 years ago, but the results that we get show no abnormalities at all, except for his platelets." Erwin frowned. "Who else knows about this?" Dr. Ryan shook his head. "As we haven't been able to determine whether Mr. Goldman is really infected with the virus, this might be a new species that has mutated from the original virus. We need to observe him for another week." Erwin did not make a sound. Once the sleeper virus entered the human body, it would only infect another party through sexual contact. It would also be passed on from the source of infection to their offspring, so the sleeper virus was also known as a genetic virus. A genetic virus itself was not airborne, and it could only infiltrate through skin-to-skin contact. The outbreak 30-50 years ago originated from a storage tank of a large hotel. All the guests in the hotel who had bathed or even used the water from the storage tank at the time had been infected. And that hotel would accept hundreds of guests on a daily basis, and the water used by the hotel's restaurant came from the hotel's storage tank. In the end, about 1,000 guests were infected daily. Not to mention that the guests had managed to infect their partners without them knowing it. Chapter 432. Not only the hotel's water source at that time, but traces of the virus had also been found in the water sources of other places, so the outbreak of the epidemic had not been a natural disaster but a man-made one. If Nolan is really infected, it will prove that my worries are right, and someone out there still hasn't given up on the research of this genetic virus. Maisie returned to the hotel and was stunned when Titus and Quincy came out of the hotel. Titus was angry when he saw her again. "Have you forgotten the promise that you made? Nolan is now hospitalized because of you. Are you happy now?" Maisie lowered her head. I'm sorry, she could not even say anything to refute him now, as Nolan was indeed shot and hospitalized because of her. Titus' expression looked gloomy. Nolan is taking huge risks just by being with you. If you really want Nolan to lead a better life, please leave him. Maisie was astonished. She then asserted, I can't leave him. Then do you want to kill him? Titus' eyes were filled with rage. Seeing that Maisie opened her mouth, but could not utter a single word, Titus added sharply, Maisie, I have my reasons when I take issue with you two being together. You are Nolan's only weakness. How do you think they got to hurt Nolan? It's all because of you. You'll kill him. Sooner or later, if you continue to stay with him. This sentence was undoubtedly a critical hit. It broke her heart as she knew that Nolan could truly sacrifice his life for her. So, will I really kill Nolan? Thinking of this, she could even feel the pain while breathing. Quincy wanted to speak up for Maisie, but seeing that Titus was furious, he knew that he might annoy him again if he were to do so. At the same time, Titus would most probably blame this particular explanation on Maisie too after being annoyed. Thus, he thought about it and decided to wait for Nolan to regain consciousness before he said anything else. Titus and Quincy left the scene, and they should be heading to the hospital, while Maisie's mood became even worse because of the conversation. Sherry was waiting for her in the hotel room. She got up and walked toward her when she saw her arrive at the hotel room. Maisie, you're back. Have you met Elder Master Goldman? Sherry knew that Titus had come to Staslow because of the incident. Mr. Goldman was injured. And Elder Master Goldman hasn't been very satisfied with his granddaughter-in-law. So, he would most probably have blamed Maisie for this whole incident. Maisie nodded. Looking at her dimmed gaze and her dispirited mood. Sherry patted her on the shoulder with a smile and comforted her. Well, don't overthink things, Maisie. Mr. Goldman has gotten out of the critical condition, hasn't he? He'll definitely wake up soon. Sherry, Maisie stared at her and asked, give it to me straight. Did I really bring harm to Nolan? Sherry was astounded for a short second and then said with a smile, why would you think so? Maisie, you're really overthinking things. Life is full of uncertainties, and nobody can ever predict what will happen next. Besides, anyone who graduated from the training camp isn't afraid of death. So, if Mr. Goldman is willing to block the shot for you, it means that you're someone very important to him. The more Maisie listened, the more saddened she became. Yes, he's willing to give up everything for me. But it's also because I'm too important to him that I'll become the very dagger that others will use to end him. After all, he pretended to be indifferent to me in front of the public just to protect me when he came to Staslow, while I knew nothing at all. I didn't know what danger he'd face in Staslow, and I didn't even know that someone else would use me to deal with him. Chapter 433. But I only want to be by his side. I didn't want to leave him alone, but I still brought harm to him in the end. Seeing that she was a little dejected, Sherry placed her hands on Maisie's shoulders and said seriously, Maisie, it's a cowardly act to back down when you're faced with difficulties. We can only solve them by overcoming them together. So, is it you, Maisie Vanderbilt, the one to be blamed for Mr. Goldman's injury? No, you're not. Our enemies have always been those people since the beginning of time. So, even if you hadn't shown up in Mr. Goldman's life at all, this crisis would eventually find its way to him. It's inevitable. Maisie smiled after listening to Sherry's words. I didn't expect you to be so good at comforting others. Sherry grinned and scratched her head awkwardly. Maisie walked up to the couch and sat down. By the way, is Rowena with those people now? Yeah, my brother has already gone out to investigate that. But I really didn't expect Rowena Summers to have something to do with those people. She's really good at concealing it. No wonder she was able to plan the incident that involved Winona. Sherry walked to her opposite and sat down. She looked rather emotional. As if Rowena's betrayal was still unacceptable to her. Maisie's eyes moved around. It seems that Rowena also participated in the incident at the amusement park, didn't she? It seems that it's time for me to meet Rowena. At the hospital. Nolan opened his eyes and woke up. After the nurse guarding him next to the bed saw that he was awake, she dashed out of the ward in a hurry. Dr. Ryan, the patient is awake. Dr. Ryan, Titus, and Quincy all came in. And Titus went straight to the bed and stared at him. Nolan, are you awake? Nolan nodded. He then looked around the interior of the ward after the nurse removed his oxygen mask. Where's Z? Titus could not help but give off a displeased expression when he saw that the first thing that Nolan asked about was Maisie. All you can think of is that woman. You almost lost your life back there. Quincy answered the question immediately. Ms. Vanderbilt has returned to the hotel. You don't have to worry about her. Nolan sat up slowly. The pain in his back made him gasp. All he remembered was that he had gotten shot. And he did not know what had happened since then. How long have I been unconscious? Mr. Goldman, you've been in a coma for 4 days, Dr. Ryan replied. Your wife has come to the hospital to visit you throughout these 4 days. Nolan wanted to get the blanket off his body but was held down by Titus. You brat, do you plan to kill yourself here? You're still under the observation of the intensive care unit. Didn't I only get shot? Why would I end up in the intensive care unit? Nolan frowned. Titus looked at Dr. Ryan. Dr. Ryan gave off a faint smile. Your condition is still a little complicated, so you'll still need to stay in the hospital for further observation. Okay. Nolan, since you're awake, you should get a good rest in the hospital, Titus said. He then ordered Quincy, you, take good care of him in the hospital. Nolan looked at Quincy after Titus, and Dr. Ryan left the ward. Have you found out about those men? Quincy nodded. Yes, in addition to the Kents. There are also men who Prince Roger hired. Rowena was taken to the LG Entertainment Club. When her blindfold was removed, and she obscurely saw the woman sitting on the couch, she was shocked. She then gnashed her teeth. Maisie Vanderbilt? Why is it you? You bitch. Why me? How can you, Miss Summers, not know the answer to this question? Maisie looked indifferent. Rowena looked at the foreign bodyguard standing behind her, and her face turned pallid in an instant. Are these Erwin Lincoln's men? Maisie got up and walked slowly toward her. It's not easy to be a double agent, is it? She then gave off a knowing smile. Does Nolan know that the incident that involved his mother had something to do with you back then? Chapter 434. Rowena trembled slightly as her eyes shifted away to dodge Maisie's gaze. I don't know what you're talking about. Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? Maisie approached her. Or should I go to your new employer, Mr. Kent, for the answer? Maisie. What do you mean by that? Rowena asked with a hint of resentment flashing across her eyes. Maisie shrugged disapprovingly. What you heard is what I mean. Titus valued you so much in the past, but you still betrayed the Goldmans and chose to side with Daniel Kent in the end. Would Daniel value you more just because of that? Rowena clenched her hands into fists and scoffed. Why ask? Are you trying to win me over? It's a pity, I won't have a future even if I get back to Goldman's now. So I might as well stay by Mr. Kent's side. Rowena's lips curled upward coldly upon seeing that Maisie did not say anything. So what if you know the truth about Mrs. Goldman Sr.'s incident from 15 years ago? Do you think the elder Master Goldman would believe that the de Armas are innocent because of this Maisie Vanderbilt? Don't be so naive. What do you think you can do for the Goldmans now? After all, person that you should worry about now is Nolan. The Goldmans can no longer protect themselves now, ha ha ha. Her smug smile hurt Maisie's eyes, especially when she mentioned Nolan. Nolan was shot and hospitalized because of me, and those people from that night have something to do with Daniel. I won't show the man who hurt my husband any mercy, no matter who they are. Maisie clenched her hands tightly. Rowena Summers, I originally planned to give you a chance to die gracefully. But it seems that you don't know how to cherish it. You plan to give me a chance? Rowena laughed frantically. Maisie Vanderbilt, what makes you think you have the right to give me a chance? Isn't it you who's pushed me to this point? Maisie looked at her and said nothing. Rowena stepped forward and grabbed Maisie by the hem of her collar. Her beautiful facial features were crammed together hysterically. Nolan shouldn't have fallen in love with you, it was you who brought harm to him, and you, Maisie Vanderbilt, is the culprit who killed him. The two bodyguards stepped forward, pulled Rowena away, and subdued her with both hands from behind. Rowena had hatred and unwillingness intertwining in her eyes and mocked Maisie. Don't you love Nolan? Don't worry. You will die and be with him soon. Maisie said softly, before that, do take good care of yourself. Maisie waved, and the two bodyguards released Rowena. Seeing that she did not do anything to her, Rowena scoffed. Maisie Vanderbilt, there are actually times where you'll feel scared. Why don't you do anything to me? Don't you want revenge since you brought me here? Come on. You can get them to kill me right now if you have the guts. I won't lay a finger on you. After all, someone else will do it for me. I hope that you won't regret it. Rowena knew that Maisie's words were implying something, but she did not know what she meant. Unfortunately, she was not in the position to care about this much anymore and left the private room with pride. Maisie watched her leave with her arms crossed in front of her. She then came out of the private room with the men and said to the person beside her, download the surveillance footage and forward it. After walking out of the clubhouse door, Maisie immediately received a message from Erwin. Nolan has woken up. She had someone drive quickly to the hospital. At Garland Manor. Rowena got slapped all of a sudden, which knocked her to the floor. It was not until Daniel threw a tablet in front of her, displaying the surveillance footage of her coming out of the LG Entertainment Club. And Maisie came out later. Rowena's pupils constricted immediately. I got it now. That bitch has been plotting against me. Mr. Kent, please listen to my explanation. Chapter 435. Rowena was kicked into the corner of the wall while Daniel loosened his tight tie, his gaze gloomy and sulky. Bitch, are you regretting your decision and planned to betray me now? Rowena shuddered and climbed to his feet. No, I really didn't betray you. Maisie asked someone to bring me there and tried to threaten me. I really didn't say anything, I swear. Daniel leaned over and pinched her chin with her fingertips. Rowena Summers, you know too many secrets now. Do you think I'll believe in what you say? Rowena trembled from head to toe. Daniel had always been a suspicious man and especially hated traitors the most. Even though she had not said anything, she now knew a lot of secrets that she should not know, including the virus incident. I swear, I really didn't tell her anything. Mr. Kent, you have to believe me. I really didn't tell her anything. I've been set up. Rowena was crying and begging. It was her fate that Daniel had found her. I can't go back to the night banquet now, nor can I go back to the Goldmans. I'll end up dead no matter where I go now. So. I can only beg him now. Daniel let go of his hand. Just when Rowena thought she could escape this catastrophe, Daniel's sullen voice came from above her head. Idiot, you actually got set up by others. It seems that I have to carve this onto your brain to make sure that you remember this so as not to be set up and say something that shouldn't be said again in the future. Rowena's breathing stopped for a split second as she heard some dogs barking outside. Several men in black appeared outside the door with 3 wolf dogs, and the fierce dogs were barking fiercely at her. Rowena's lips and teeth were trembling, and she felt cold down to each of the pores on her body. She grabbed Daniel's trousers. Mr. Kent, I know it's my fault. I'll remember it now. Please give me another chance, please. Daniel withdrew his legs. There was not even a single hint of pity in his eyes. The men in black let go of the dog leash, and the 3 wolf dogs rushed toward Rowena viciously. Miserable screams tore through the night sky, and metallic blood scent pervaded the entire study. It was not until she was on the verge of dying from the dog's bites and mauls that Daniel had the dogs pulled away. Rowena was covered in blood, and half of her face was ravaged. Her eyes were dim and had lost their luster as she stared blankly at a corner of the study. "TSK, it seems that this is the only way to get you to be obedient. Someone comes and bring her out to heal her injuries. Make sure that she doesn't die," Daniel said while waving his hand. 2 bodyguards dragged out Rowena. Daniel picked up the tablet on the ground, looked at Maisie, who was frozen in the video that had been paused, and slammed the tablet against the wall. The screen was broken. At the hospital, Maisie appeared outside the ward. "Nolan." Nolan looked up and saw her rushing toward him like a gust and hugged him tightly. He did not have the time to react and sit up still, so he fell backward onto the bed together with her. The pain in his back caused him to take a sharp breath. Maisie got up quickly and said immediately, "I'm sorry, did I hurt you?" Seeing that she was nervous about his injury, Nolan smiled affectionately and said in a low and hoarse voice, "What do you think? Did you dash over here? Planning to murder your husband?" Seeing Maisie bite her lip without saying a word and her eyes glistening with the tears that had welled up in her eyes, Nolan stopped abruptly and slowly raised his hand to wipe the tears from the corner of her eyes. "Z, I'm sorry, I've made you worry." "Nolan, you're an idiot." Maisie's tears could not stop rolling down, and she had completely disrupted Nolan's calmness. He embraced her in his arms and coaxed her softly. "Okay, it's all my fault. Don't cry already, or I'll feel bad." Maisie's shoulders trembled. I thought that you'll never wake up." Chapter 436. Nolan lowered his gaze, kissed her head, was going to say something, but suddenly started violently coughing. Maisie got up, her heart in knots. "Nolan, are you all right?" Nolan raised his hand to stifle the cough and moved his face away. He noticed some sticky substance in his palm and was surprised, but since Maisie didn't notice anything, he curled his hand into a fist and smiled at her. "I'm all right. I just choked on saliva." Maisie pursed her lips. "Are you hungry then? Do you want some food?" Nolan's eyes were soft. "I'm hungry now that you mentioned it. I want to eat something that you made." Maisie stood up. "All right, I'll go make something, hang tight." She walked to the door, saw Erwin, and said, "Uncle Erwin, could you help me look after Nels for a bit?" Erwin nodded. After Maisie left, Erwin walked into the room and saw Nolan looking at his open palm. "Did you cough blood?" Erwin knew. Nolan paused and closed his hand. "Yes." He thought of something and looked at him. "How did you know?" Erwin answered. "Because you're in bad shape." Nolan held his bloodied palm tight and calmly said, "Do you know what's wrong with me?" Erwin lowered his gaze, and after a long time, he said, "You've been infected by the sleeper virus." The air in the room became cold. Nolan's lips were tense, and after a while, he said, "Does Z know?" "She doesn't. Other than Dr. Ryan and me, no one else knows," Erwin replied. Nolan looked out the window at the sunset. He knew about the sleeper virus. There was no cure to it, so death was imminent. Only one person had the cure. But he had disappeared for a few decades. The sleeper virus could spread to partners, which meant he could infect Maisie. Even with protection, the chances of infection were still 0.9%. Erwin knew what he was thinking about, and his lips moved. "You don't plan on telling her?" "No." With her stubbornness, she would. Nolan knew Maisie well. Even if she knew that she was infected, she wouldn't leave him. The woman wasn't afraid of anything and wouldn't care even when faced with danger. That was why he started to worry. Erwin handed him some napkins. "Wipe it off." Nolan took the napkins and wiped the blood off his palm, then asked, "How was I infected?" "Probably when you were hit." "You mean that the bullet carried the virus?" Nolan's eyes dimmed. Erwin nodded. "The sleeper virus still exists, and people are studying it. Now that it's used on you, I'm afraid that not long after this, what happened 30 years ago will repeat." Seeing that Nolan was silent, Erwin continued. "The virus you have is a newly mutated version, so there's no incubation period. Which means you are already showing symptoms. The sleeper virus from 30 years ago had an incubation period of a year. When infected, the immune system would be affected, and those who were constantly sick would stop falling sick for a year, not even the common flu. Even the cancer cells would slow down in cancer patients, reducing the pain." Chapter 437. But once the incubation period was over, the infected would constantly cough up blood, and the immune system would worsen drastically. Cancer cells would deteriorate quickly. For those with cancer, metabolism would speed up, platelet count would become abnormal, and within a year, the person would pass. Nolan chuckled sadly. "So how long do I have left?" Erwin frowned. "Based on your current situation, about 3 to 4 years. Maisie brought the dinner that she made over to the hospital, and when she stepped into the room, she saw Nolan staring out the window while Erwin was nowhere to be seen. "Nolan, I made dinner for you." She walked to the side of his bed and placed the dinner on the table. Nolan looked at her and smiled. "Okay, I want you to feed me." Maisie didn't oppose. She opened the container and fed him while sitting next to his bed. When she saw Nolan eating, she asked, "Has Uncle Erwin left?" "Yes, he left because he had something on." Maisie continued to send food into his mouth and smiled. "How is it?" Nolan lowered his head and smiled. "I wouldn't dare say that it's bad if you made it." Maisie pouted. When he finished the food, Maisie put the container aside and said, "I'll stay here with you tonight." Nolan looked at her longingly and just said, "Mmm." She asked for an extra bed from the nurse, put the pillow down, and laid down. Nolan laid on his side to look at her. "Z. Maisie turned to look at him. "What is it?" Nolan's eyes were dark. "If I hide something from you in the future, will you be upset?" Maisie paused for a long time before moving her blanket. "No. If you hid anything from me, I would think that it's for my own good." Nolan beamed but didn't say anything. Maisie slept well the entire night, but Nolan couldn't. He greedily and lovingly stared at her sleeping face before he turned around, his eyes falling into cold darkness. The next day, when Maisie woke up, she didn't see Nolan in bed. She went out to ask the nurse, who told her that Nolan had gone for a checkup. She tidied up the bed, folded it up, and went to fill up the kettle because she noticed that there was no water. On the way back, she bumped into Quincy standing outside the room. Just when she was going to greet him, she heard Titus' voice coming from the room. "You want to be discharged now? Are you crazy?" "Discharged?" Maisie paused. "Nolan wants to be discharged?" Nolan sat on the edge of the bed. Even though he was in a hospital gown, he looked much better. "I just have a gunshot wound. There's no need to lie here for too long. I have work to get to." "Rascal, how could you not love your life more? I'm going to shoot you and be done with it." Titus was so furious he went overboard. Nolan smiled. "I can't live for much longer anyway." "You." Titus wanted to say something, but seeing that Nolan was looking outside, he turned and saw Maisie standing outside with the kettle in hand, scoffed, and said, "You would throw your life away for a woman? Is it worth it?" Maisie knew that Titus was getting even more annoyed with her because of Nolan's injury, but what could she say? Nolan did get hurt because of her. She pressed her lips together and put the kettle down on the cabinet. "Are you getting discharged?" Chapter 438. Nolan calmly answered, "Yes, there's no need for me to stay in the hospital." He then looked at Quincy. Get me a ticket to go home for the morning after tomorrow. Quincy froze. But your body. I know my condition. Nolan had made up his mind. Quincy guiltily looked at Titus, who shook his arms and said, he can just go if he wants to. I have no say in this anymore. He angrily swung his arms and walked out. Maisie bit her lip and walked to Nolan. You should listen to Grandpa. It's not too late to go back a few days later. It was a long flight. What should they do if his wound opened up midway? Nolan looked at her coldly, his lips tightly pressed together. Maisie felt cold for an instant because she was not used to this. Nolan? I have to get back. He got up without an explanation and walked to get his clothes. When he took off his gown, Maisie could clearly see the bandage on his back. Other than the bullet wound, there were new knife wounds. Probably from the fight with the man in black. Maisie walked to him and hugged him from behind, feeling his warmth, but there was a hint of coldness. Nolan stopped putting on his clothes, his lips tightly pressed together. Nolan, you haven't recovered. Her voice was soft, like a breeze in the night that stole his heart away. Nolan's eyes grew dark. He turned around, pulled her arms away, and quietly said, stop that. Seeing him put on his shirt, Maisie helped him button up. Nolan didn't say a word but didn't stop her. When she finished buttoning him, she looked down. Nolan. Are you really hiding something from me? She looked up at him. She could feel that Nolan was acting unusual that day and was more distant. Nolan's eyes were dark like water in a deep lake. There are things that you shouldn't ask. He picked up his slacks and frowned when he saw that Maisie was frozen on the spot. Are you going to watch me change into my pants? Maisie paused and turned around. I won't watch then. Nolan quietly chuckled. After Nolan was discharged, they went back to his room at the hotel. Maisie went back to pack her bags and told Sherry to get ready for their flight the day after tomorrow. Madame Nera wanted to meet her in the afternoon. So Maisie went to see her at the restaurant. After Madame Nera heard that she had been abducted during the show, she wanted to know how she was. Maisie smiled and replied, thanks for your concern, I'm alright. That's great. It's alright if you missed it. You still have another chance. I believe in you. Madame Nera's care and understanding touched Maisie. At that moment, Madame Nera's assistant walked over. Madam, we need to get to the airport in 2 hours. Alright, she replied. Maisie asked, you're going back today? Madame Nera nodded. Yes, an afternoon flight. What about you? Maisie awkwardly smiled. The day after tomorrow. Contact me when you're back. I'm going back today. Madame Nera's assistant pushed her wheelchair away while Maisie was still seated in her spot, thinking while looking out the window. Ms. Zora. Maisie turned around when she heard that voice and saw Jones. She paused before smiling. You're having a meal here too? Yes, and I bumped into you. Jones looked at the 2 sets of cutleries on the table. Are you here with your husband? Chapter 439. Maisie's hand that was holding the teacup stopped in midair, and she looked down. No, it was with my business partner. Maisie hadn't seen Nolan since he left the hospital, and not even Sherry knew what he was up to. She took a sip of the tea but suddenly felt sick and ran to the washroom while covering her mouth. Ms. Zora? Even though she knew that Jones was calling for her, she couldn't reply. She ran into the washroom and threw up in the sink. Everything she ate during lunch came back out. She turned on the tap to wash away the vomit, but she threw up again. It repeated until there was nothing left to throw up, then she washed her face and dried it with a hand towel. She realized that Jones was waiting for her when she got out of the washroom. Seeing that she was looking sick, he asked, "Are you not feeling well?" "I'm fine. It was probably something I ate." Maisie waved her hand. "Do you need me to send you to a hospital?" Jones asked. Maisie shook her head and squeezed a smile. There's really no need, thank you. I prefer to take a rest. All right. Jones didn't press on. When Maisie got back to her room, she drank some warm water, but once the water went down, she started feeling sick again and went to the washroom for another round. She looked at her pale face in the mirror, her stomach burning. It really seemed to be something she had eaten, but she hadn't eaten anything unusual. When she heard the doorbell, she slowly walked to open the door. She was stunned when she saw that it was Nolan. Nolan walked in, closed the door, and asked, "You're not feeling well?" Maisie beamed. Did Jones bump into him and tell him? She put out her arms around his neck and smiled. Yes, I feel horrible. Will you stay with me? Nolan helplessly carried her to the bed and laid her down. What's wrong? His voice was soft, unlike how it usually was. And his breath brushed her cheeks like a breeze. Maisie's hands were still on his shoulder. It's my stomach. Right when she said that, her stomach burned. He lightly rubbed it and asked in a low voice, "Is it a gastric issue?" Maisie didn't answer. It wasn't gastric. And her stomach wasn't hurting, but she just felt like throwing up. She just wanted him to spend time with her. I'll go get some medication for you. He wanted to get up, but Maisie hugged his arm. No, just stay here with Nolan. Noticed her anxiety, lowered his gaze, and patted her head. All right, I'll stay. Are you feeling better? Maisie asked. Nolan nodded. Yes, don't worry. Maisie looked at him for a while. Nolan pushed the few strands of hair that were covering her face away, and his lips parted. What's wrong? Maisie pressed her lips together and looked away. Nothing. Nolan, you're hiding something from me, and I won't ask what it is, but don't. Don't be hot and cold with me. She had noticed his changes. Even though she didn't know the reason that he was hot and cold toward her, she was anxious. If it weren't because something happened. Why would he? Nolan hugged her in his arms and put his chin on the top of her head. He said in a low voice, I just need to get a few things settled, Z. There's nothing more to it. Nolan didn't want to let go once she was in his arms, she was fully relying on him. Which was something he had always looked forward to, but he couldn't get her involved. Chapter 440. Maisie hugged him and pushed her face into his chest. All right, I believe you. Nolan looked down, but his eyes were in a vortex that turned dark. Daniel received a message and threw his phone against the wall. The men behind him lowered their heads and didn't say a word. One of them carefully said, Erwin is involved in this now, and since Titus Goldman is back and knows that his grandson was injured, I don't think he will let our men off. Daniel stood in front of the window and took a puff of his vape. The vapor lingered on the glass and blurred out the reflection. The men who are caught by Titus will not be coming back. The man looked horrible. What should we do then? He breathed out vapor and asked, what did Roger say? The man answered, he wants you to settle this matter. One more thing, the hospital has probably found out that Nolan has been infected. Daniel's eyes darkened as he slowly turned around. Get rid of the men. Don't let too many people know about the virus, at least not yet. The night banquet will eventually fall after Nolan's death. But if the news about the virus gets out, the investigators will be involved, and it won't be good for us. Daniel couldn't let his plan fail at the final stage. He had to see the Goldmans witness their heir die of a virus with no cure. In the dark basement, the lights were dim. Daniel came to the room, which wasn't large. It had a bed and a cupboard. There were bandages on the cupboard covered in blood and antiseptics. The person on the bed was on 4 drips and covered in bandages all over the body except for half their face. When she heard footsteps, Rowena opened her eyes but couldn't make a sound because she was weeping. Daniel sat at the edge of her bed and touched her face. His eyes were smiling, but there was no emotion. Don't worry, I won't let you die yet. I still need you. A tear rolled down from the corner of Rowena's eye. Unsure if it was because of pain or sadness. I'm not the one that you should be hating, but the woman who framed you. She did this to you, so, Daniel got closer to her and smiled coldly. I need you to kill that woman and trigger a war between the de Armas and the Goldmans. I want to see the night banquet fall within a year. Can you do it? Rowena clasped her fingers on the edge of the bed, the hatred in her eyes becoming stronger. Daniel smiled. Good girl. Daniel got excited as he wondered if the Godelmans would be able to handle two big issues. Erwin met Maisie the day before they went back, and they took a walk in the hotel's garden. Uncle Erwin, did Nolan say anything to you after I left the hospital the day before yesterday? Erwin smiled and changed the subject. We didn't talk about anything. I just asked about his condition. When are you going back? Maisie answered, tomorrow. It's good to go back earlier. Erwin stopped walking while looking into the distance. Staslo isn't really safe. I can't keep following you around. Maisie turned to look at him. Are you helping the Godelmans because of me? Erwin smiled and raised a hand to pat her head. I had to ensure your safety. You shouldn't have been involved in any of this. At that moment, Khan walked over and said something into Erwin's ears, which caused his face to drop.